Good evening. It's just getting dark outside. It's the 3rd of September 2022, and it's been a very wet day. Not much joy for those attending outdoor events, but definitely this rain will do a lot of good because ground was very dry. Hopefully, it doesn't rain too much. Now, a thing that not many people know is that back years ago, the Shah of Iran was overthrown in a revolution, and the Ayatollah Khomeini and the present Iranian government took over. And at that time, America ordered two $100 printing presses for printing money from Switzerland, which apparently makes the best machines. It ordered two of them anyway at colossal agreed price, but when they were finished and completed, the United States only bought one and refused to buy the other. Don't ask me why, I have no idea why, but they wouldn't buy it anyway after them ordering it. And what did Switzerland do? Only give it to Iran. Iran bought it at a knockdown price. And Iran then began to print $100 bills and let them out to devalue the American currency. America would probably have to then order another machine or do something. There might be some way around it, but you could know the forged ones. They were easily known. There was something about them. I think it was the number. The American government, the Federal Reserve, decides what number goes on $100 bills. But anyway, I had these in my hand, forgeries. They were no good, no value, but they were the American and the police all over the world were gathering them up in a good amount. But I think an agreement was reached between the United States and Iran that they wouldn't continue, that they discontinue it, and maybe they found some way to stop it. But not many know that happened. That is absolutely true. All you need for the date is the date of the Iranian Revolution. It was about 2 years after the Shah was deposed. Okay, now what I'm trying to do here in this video is to explain a thing about money. And we'll say there's an island, and we'll call it Louth Land, and it's the size of the County Louth and a bit more, and it's a kingdom. So we draw a map of it here. We'd say it includes a bit of Navan, a bit of Trim in County Meath, a bit of Kingscourt where you have Kingspan, and Carrickmacross where you have the gypsum and the brick clay and all that. So it has good resources, good land, good fishing if they still own it. It's independent and all that. But we'd say the king would never allow money to be used on the island. And it's a kind of a closed place. So that would retard the economy. It would retard everything, because how would you buy a horse? I mean, how many sheep would you need? Or if you had a horse and you want to sell them and buy sheep, how many sheep would you need? And the same, how would you buy butter? How would you do all these types of things? So you'd have no medium of exchange. You'd have a very rough barter system. And the livestock marts would have to find some way to try and get around it, maybe to try and use gold, I don't know. But you'd have a hobbled or a poor economy, even though you have all these resources, because you don't have the money, any money to represent it. I think you can understand that. Now we say that the old king died, and the son took over, or the daughter, and they were more modern, and they decided that they needed money, and they decided to introduce money, and they did so. So money would immediately make the economy more efficient. You'd have a medium of exchange. Now, they could do that in several ways. They could just print it, a little of it, and let it round, or they could print and tax the public as they printed. In other words, they could pay for their public services, their health and their police and their army and all that, out of the printed money. But up to now, they'd probably have some other way of having tribune collected. But you could do that, or you could tax as you would print. So as you let out some money, you'd pull some of it back until you'd eventually get to an equilibrium where the money and the value of it would be fairly well settled. Now you'd put a name on it, we'd call it the Louth, and you'd put a value, 100 cent we'd say, or 100 pennies, it wouldn't matter. So there's the Louth, and it'll be 100. So the next thing you have to do is decide what it's going to buy. You have a kind of a recommended value. So you might say a cow is worth 1,000, and a sheep is worth, we'd say, 200, a tractor 25,000, you see, and then a pound of beef 20, a pound of butter 10, firewood 20 for a 100 kilo bag, and let's say a dozen eggs 15. So you try and get a kind of a value for it to get it started off, and there'd be all kinds of teething problems, but they would soon get over it now. So the new money would definitely add to the island's value. You'd now have, as well as all these resources, a good people and all that, and good infrastructure and all that. You'd now have an actual medium of simple exchange. And so you can see that the value of your island will go up, and even it would be a symbol of good government. So good government in an island like that would be good for prosperity, and so the money it would produce would also be good for prosperity. So I think you can understand that it would lubricate the economy, but supply must be kept so that the 100 cent is equal to, stays the same basically as best as can, buys the same basket of goods. So now, if the new king decided to, or queen decided to allow in a bit of migration, and if because of this new economy more people were having children and couples were having more children and all that sort of thing, you'd have an increase in population, and you could print more money to allow them to have the same money in their pocket, because there'd be more people producing more, and so the money would still keep its value roughly. And that's what happened when America was being developed from 1700 and the 1800s and all that, and as it was being developed through the 19th century, in the Victorian times and that. They had to print more dollars because there were simply more people going in. If you didn't, the people would have no money in their pocket, or very little, and the wee bit they have would buy 10 times too much. So you'd have deflation. You'd have to keep the money supply gradually in line with good practice to equal the value. Now, so if too much money were printed, you went mad, you'd have a bit of inflation, so you'd have to pull back a bit on the money. Bear in mind, if it's a paper currency, which is coloured paper, you could do that. You could refuse to print too much this year if you printed a bit too much last year. So now, if you printed too much, you'd have deflation. Sorry, if you printed too much, you'd have inflation. If you printed too much, you'd have deflation. And there'd be an exchange rate, because people in Britain might buy your currency if it was good, if it represented a good store of value, and you'd have to provide some money for them. But remember, if you printed 1,000 of your currency, loads, and the British bought it, some banks bought in Britain, they'd be giving you sterling, and you could now store that sterling in your country and have it there to buy things if you needed it or whatever. So you still have good value there. So now, so the king would benefit from the initial printing. He could pay his soldiers. There could be a war coming, or he could decide to beef up his army or his police or something. And so he could benefit from having this. He could give them this money for nothing, really. He could, but he should tax for it. And of course, the people would see the benefit then of the better public services, and he could charge a bit of tax for that. Now, he wouldn't have to charge tax if the output of his economy was so good. He could put a levy on the stuff going out, like a VAT or that type of thing. So there are various ways in a thriving economy to get value. Now, so the thing is now, so what I have here is the king benefits from the initial printing, but after a time it would equal out. After a time you'd get to a situation where it would be more or less equal. Everything would just level off, and water will reach its own level, or money value will reach its own level. So there are three ways that the finances economy thinks he wants. And one is to produce more in the economy, the other is to tax more, and the other is to borrow. So he could head off and borrow from foreign banks, borrow from foreign investors. He could issue a bond where people could buy into his country's government and say, we'll have a share of that, and then after 10 years they get so much back, and he could have that if he needed the money. If he was really wise, he wouldn't have to borrow at all. He could use his own resources, but he might need to borrow a little bit and then pay it back if his economy was going well. Now, the fourth way is to print more money. Just print it and nothing opposite it. And you see, that's what's happening at the minute. They just print it every time they're stuck, instead of taxing and instead of borrowing, instead of producing more. They certainly won't be producing more anyway, because they're anti in Ireland and the Western countries. They're anti-industry. So that's the other ways he could secure money. But the other thing is that you could have an independent money supply. You could have somebody with a cryptocurrency or whatever, and if they were allowed, now he could stop them or he could introduce regulation to stop them. But you could get a bank, someone saying to him, right, we want to set up a bit of an bank here, and we'll have our own wee thing. But he might insist then that the legal tender is his money, so they might have to use his money. So with the crypto too, if it's kept in line with the goods and values of some economy, then it should be all right. The problem I have with the cryptocurrencies is what economy are they kept in line with, and how are they to store value, and who's there to verify if anything goes wrong? Imagine if there's 40 crypto banks and one of them is a fraud. How are the police going to investigate it? How are they going to investigate something which nobody can actually see or hear and doesn't have an office? So it's a bit dodgy. Now, savers have value. People who save in this new currency will have value there in the bank or whatever, or they can buy property, or they can buy metals, or they can invest in timber or something like that. But the king can take some of it by inflating. He can tax them for having money in the bank, but he can also, on the interest, but he can also take some of it by printing more money. So if he prints more money, he hits at the store value of the money. Now, there'll probably be a clamour for democracy, for democracy, and with people doing so well. That could happen. And if there comes to be democracy, then the next thing you have is you have parties, and usually it ends up with two parties. And if one of them makes a dog's dinner of the state, they're put out by the electorate, and the other one gets in, and they proceed to make a dog's dinner the very same. They have, whether they like it or not. The fact is there's collusion among them. We saw the collapse in 2008 with Fianna Fáil in Ireland, and Enda Kenny, the Fine Gael leader, said not one more red cent will go into the banks. And when he got in and people voted for him, he did exactly that. He gave all the money to the banks again. So they lie. And this is one of the things that it's very hard to change that two-party system. There's strong opposition to it. It's just to make you think that you have a democratic right when in fact you don't have a democratic right at all. It's the worst of two evils, and they're all the same sows, pigs. Individual TDs and individual members of parliament may lose their seat, but the system has no time for any individual, not even elected representatives. So then you get the losing party leaving an absolute mess for the new party, and they take over. And that happened during the 70s when there was a terrible economic situation in Ireland, and you had a Fine Gael Labour government with Garret Fitzgerald, and you had Dick Spring, and you had Richie Ryan, and they called him Richie Ruin, and they tried to bring back the economy and put a bit of money on petrol and that, and trying to bring back the economy. And the minute the economy went to get good, Fianna Fáil offered to throw it all away, and they got elected in. So you have this constant conflict between the people who are ignorant, more or less, and their well-being. They don't know what their well-being is. And in actual fact, after 2008, the wisest thing for the Irish people to do could have been to return Fianna Fáil, put them back into power, because they had made the dog's dinner, and let them clean it up. And I heard a few older people saying that they got it into this mess, let them get us out of it. Certainly putting Fine Gael and all these Greens and all, look what this has led to. Just look at the mess we have today with energy. So that's the point there. So you see the difficulty with democracy and the advantage that the dictatorship or the king has. He can plan long term. He knows he's going to be there, and he can make wiser decisions. So individual people who vote for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and all these, they are wise people. They don't throw anything away themselves, but yet they go into the ballot box and they do this. And this is just the way the system works. So now, at the moment, the dollar and the euro is becoming worthless. They're just printing it. It's worthless. Nobody bloody wants it. It's nearly a worthless currency, although you can't live without it, and that has to be said. Gold is a limited use. Even if you're in a desert island like Robinson Crusoe's man, what's his name, Ben Gunn, having all that wealth was no good until somebody came who wanted that wealth. As long as he wasn't discovered on that island, that wealth was no good. He had to forage for his bit to eat every day. So the thing about it is, what I think, folks, is that storing wealth the way mankind has developed it, is unsustainable. This idea that somebody back in 1500 can make a will and leave his vast wealth to his family or even without a family in such a way that right today in 2022, that money can be the part of a trust or can still be being used. Like Sir James Goldsmith had three wives, and he made a will that if one of them, any of them contested the will, they got nothing. They couldn't contest any part of his wishes, and that will is still there. He was very, very wealthy. He was a financier. And so this is possible. It is actually possible for people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and what do you call that other fella, Musk, Elon Musk, and them. It is technically possible for them to arrange their wealth in such a way that they could affect the world and its well-being in 400 years from now. That is unsustainable. In the animal kingdom, that doesn't happen. If the lion eventually dies, well, somebody else takes over. What he had and what he controlled is irrelevant. He'll not be having it, and maybe his family might have bit for a while. And in farmland and things, right, people leave a bit of property to their children, but they have to keep reproducing. If at any stage they stop having children, or the children don't turn out the way they want them and they want to disinherit them, well then essentially there's not a whole lot you can do. You can't control things that well. There are very, very few farms of land that were left in a will for 300 years ago that are still in the same family. It's nearly impossible to do. So it's an unsustainable thing. It's an unsustainable system that you can do that. That's my opinion on that. The real nature is that you can't. Once you're gone, your property can hang around, or somebody can have it for a while, but they eventually leave the scene as well. And government keeps getting its money. If somebody dies with no one, the government takes all they have, and the government is constantly taking in taxes and taking in taxes, and that's the way it is. So I'm just making the point, and what I set out to do, folks, on this video, and I'll soon end now on 16:57 minutes, is that you see how money helps an economy. It gives it a boost. It makes it more efficient. See, and it makes it more valuable, easier to work. It's like communication. It's like a mobile phone. You can ring people and check different things. You can become informed, and so it's one of the essentials of any society. And even in olden times, they had butter and they had stuff like that. So even in the living period of people right today in Ireland and Britain, there are people who would remember a sort of barter for things like eggs and butter. In my father's time, people came to the shop and gave in eggs from the farm, very poor people, and he'd give them a quarter of tea and a little bit of sugar and maybe a pot of jam or a loaf of bread. And there'd never be any money exchanged. The money was only a sort of a guideline. So this is what it is. You won't get rid of money essentially as long as there are people, but the system where it's mistreated and handled otherwise than a store of ordinary wealth is flawed. And the fact that governments can print it, borrow it, and borrow now that their grandchildren will have to pay it back, that would seem to be a bit unsustainable. And will the grandchildren agree to that? You'd have to get the grandchildren to vote for it. What happens if you get a Castro character or a Kim Jong too, who says, well, I'm not paying anymore, and he gets elected? And that's what a lot of this communism is. They throw out the debt and they say, right, we take off from here. The only thing is not that simple. It disrupts the whole world economy when that happens. I hope I've explained that to you folks in a reasonable way with my notional island there. And I hope I've explained that it's a useful guide to you. How money is a natural thing. Yes, it is. It's a store of value, and it's a natural thing. It's a way of us putting value, and it allows government and our modern government and our tax system to work, and our public servants and all that to be paid, and our defence forces and everything like that. So it is hard to see how you could do without it, but it's so handy and it's so good that it's been abused. They just see that they can press a button and print away to beat the band. And you see, that's why we run into these problems. And then the other problem is that you overvalue stuff. You overvalue things in your accounts. and say that your house is worth 5 times what it is to show a profit. I think that's a flaw in the accounting system. So you get all this, but all told, there'll be money forever as long as there's people going about it. I think there'll be some form of a means of exchange. Folks, that's it. Thumbs up or thumbs down. We'll see you back another 20 minutes. We'll see you back for something else. Bye.